are these people?
So yeah, so we're going to talk about Blood Diamonds as our first segment tonight, and
not just the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio speaking South African.
Right. So shout out to Sabby. She put out a tweet, and she tweeted, "I heartily encourage everyone covering Israel's attack on Gaza to connect the Congo. Israel oppressed and exploited the Congolese as well. This is helpful when debating Zionists." And she linked this article that we are going to read. I believe Sabby also used the same article, but challenge accepted. As we said, we love when our community offers us stories to talk about. And as we said, we wanted to talk about Congo for a while. And we've admitted we have put that off, but I think this will be as good of a time as any to now talk about what's happening in Congo. So let's get into it. This article is from San Francisco Bayview, which I believe is a local newspaper of color. This article is written by Jeffrey J.
Mainly green, from what I see. You know?
Yeah.
But,
but he titles Diamonds Drenched in Blood, Unmasking Israel's Role in the Congolese Crisis. And just so you guys know, this was written back in November last year. So he continues, children between 5 and 16 are considered the easiest source of cheap labor and are regularly employed in the diamond mining industry between 6 to 7 days a week. Because of their small size, children may also be asked to perform the most dangerous activities, such as entering narrow mine shafts or descending into pits where landslides may claim their lives, reports RGNN in a 2015 story, Congo, Diamonds, and Poverty. In the heart of Africa, where the earth is rich with diamonds, lies the Democratic Republic of Congo, a land steeped with beauty and turmoil. This nation, endowed with vast natural resources, has become a tragic illustration of how global greed and geopolitical agendas can ravage a country. The DRC story is not just about its diamonds, it's a saga of exploitation and lost promises. The allure of these precious stones has attracted various international players, casting long shadows over the nation's sovereignty and the well-being of its people. The year 1997 marked a pivotal moment in this narrative as Israeli diamond businesses began penetrating the Congolese market. This incursion coincided ominously with a rapid destabilization of the country. By 1998, the DRC was plunged into a vortex of conflict and chaos, underscoring the disastrous impact of external economic interests in politically fragile regions. This was not merely a coincidence, but a stark demonstration of how pursuing natural resources can trigger and expedite regional instability. The echoes of this turmoil continue to resonate, revealing the deep scars left by these exploitative engagements. The recent history of the DRC intertwines with controversial figures like Dan Trollier, I guess, and Benny Steinmetz, who have become emblematic of the intricate dance between resource exploitation and international politics. Gertlier's dealings in the Congo led to U.S. sanctions that the Trump administration controversially lifted, and Steinmetz's conviction in the mining scandal in Guinea are not isolated incidents. Instead, they reflect a larger, more systemic pattern of Israeli involvement in African mining, particularly in the Congo, a manifestation of a global practice where resource-rich African nations are often left grappling with the consequences of corruption and exploitation. Indeed, let's expand this section to illustrate the connection between the Israeli diamond industry economics and alleged destabilization in Congo, highlighting the perceived hypocrisy. Any thoughts before we move on?
Nope, sounds like standard colonial nonsense.
Yeah.
So, and of course the Israelis want a cut of this, right? So
yes.
Cool.
Well, not just them, like
everybody.
West.
Yeah,
they are. Well, they are a proxy to the West after all. So yeah, not surprising. So so I mean, just given our relationship, it makes sense, that Israel, given its proximity to Africa, would, be involved in this. But
Right.
anyway, we'll continue. Um, Israel's foray into the Congolese diamond industry in its economic narrative. Since entering the diamond trade in Congo in 1997, Israeli companies have carved out a dominant position, contributing substantially to Israel's economy. As of 2016, cut diamonds accounted for an astounding 23.2% of Israel's total exports, making them the country's most total. Yes.
Yeah. That's a lot. 23% of your that's a good chunk of change of your export business. So,
Right.
But
making them the country's most significant export product and constituting 12% of the world's diamond production. This industry is not just a business sector, it's a powerhouse of national economic strength, bolstering Israel's standing on the global stage. However, this ascent in the diamond trade coincides alarmingly with the descent of the Congo into conflict and turmoil, raising critical questions about the industry's impact on the region's stability. Amidst this economic boom, the Israeli diamond industry continues to garner prestigious accolades and recognition at home, starkly contrasting with the situation in the Congo. Industry leaders like Benny Meloff of MID House of Diamonds are celebrated with high honors like the Israel Diamond Industry Dignitary Award, underscoring their esteemed status within the nation's economic fabric. These awards, bestowed among government officials and industry elites, symbolize the industry's esteemed position in Israel. However, this national pride and acclaim starkly contrasts with the allegations of the industry's role in fueling conflict and destabilization in resource-rich nations like the Congo. This dichotomy paints a picture of hypocrisy, where the industry's prosperity and recognition within Israel are juxtaposed against the backdrop of the suffering and turmoil in regions from which these precious gems originate. Dangolia's saga in the Congo is a stark emblem of the intricate web of exploitation that plagues resource-rich African nations. Gertlier, an Israeli mining magnate, found himself in the crosshairs of the U.S. government, which imposed sanctions against him in December 2017 and June 2018. These sanctions respond to his opaque and corrupt mining deals, facilitated by his close relationship with former Congolese President Joseph Kabila. Gertlier's dealers were not just business transactions, they were interwoven with the political fabric of the Congo, influencing decisions at the highest levels and affecting the lives of millions of Asians. So, in other words,
AKA resources that like oil would be or iron would be. This is and they're upset that really the US was upset he started dealing within Africa, it sounds like.
Right. But how different is that from what we do in terms of befriending African politicians who are heavily corrupt and are willing to play ball with the West to enrich themselves to the detriment of their.
He just wasn't our friend. He was someone else's, which that's about the only crime so far.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure you're dealing in blood diamonds in Africa. There's a lot going on with that. Even just the mining of diamonds itself is pretty bloody. So,
Right.
But, yeah.
The controversial pivot in this saga occurred during the final days of the Trump administration, which quietly eased these sanctions, allowing Gertlier a reprieve from the stringent restrictions previously imposed. This move was not made public and surprised many, particularly given the severity of the accusations against Gertlier. The easing of sanctions raised critical questions about the U.S. government's commitment to combating corruption and promoting ethical practices in international trade. However, this respite was short-lived. The Biden administration, responding to international outcry and the calls from and human rights groups, reversed Trump's decision and reinstated the sanctions. This action reaffirmed the U.S. stance against corruption, particularly in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a nation long ravaged by external interests exploiting its natural resources. The reinstatement of these sanctions by the Biden administration sent a clear message. Corruption and exploitation in international business, particularly in vulnerable nations like the Congo, would not be tolerated.
Yeah, whatever you
This
say.
shift underscored This shift underscored the significant geopolitical implications and the U.S.'s role in shaping international business ethics and practice.
Which is everyone's problem, which is why people are joining BRICS.
Right.
Yeah. This was written in when? 2023, something like that?
Year.
Last year? Okay.
This past fall.
Mm-hmm.
The case of Benny Steinmetz in Guinea presents another glaring sample of the intricate entanglements between African resource exploitation and international business global.
What have we talked about in Guinea? We've talked about Guinea. We're one of the few people who've talked about Guinea. Go look up Paradise Bombed on our channel. I'll try to annotate it for you lazy people watching the clip. But we've talked about what's going on over there, and it's all the same colonialist nonsense that goes on everywhere. So nice to see another one in here, you know, tied to the Israelis. So yay. Cool. Okay.
Steinmetz, an Israeli businessman, faced legal scrutiny for his involvement in one of the mining industry's most contentious legal disputes. He was found guilty of bribing Mandinde Touré, the wife of Guinea's late president Lassana Conté, to secure exploration permits of iron ore beneath the Sinadu Mountains.
And we've talked about what they're willing to do to get it.
Right. The court convicted Steinmetz for orchestrating payments totaling $8.5 million between 2006 and 2012, underlining a disturbing pattern of corruption that directly impeded Guinea's developmental prospects.
Okay, of course. Why does everything come back around, Collin? Why? Why do we cover stuff and then months later it comes up again?
I mean,
okay.
Is it well?
I mean, it's just like, and it's all roads lead to Israel, apparently. You know, like you follow the corruption and it goes back there.
Well, I think, you know, at the time we didn't necessarily make that connection to Israel, but I think now with more stuff, but obviously happening now, you know, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of interesting how this wasn't really necessarily public knowledge at all. In terms of making this connection with Israel.
Yeah.
So but anyway, the implications of Steinmetz's actions extended far beyond Guinea's borders. His conviction paints a troubling picture of the role of Israeli businessmen in the global mining sector. It casts a shadow over the ethical practices of international mining deals and raises questions about the accountability and transparency of such high-stake business ventures. Steinmetz's case is not just about individual wrongdoing. It is emblematic of a broader issue where powerful business figures exploit governments' weaknesses in resource-rich nations, often leaving behind a trail of socioeconomic and environmental disruption. This controversy is a stark reminder of the need for stringent international regulations and oversight to prevent the exploitation of vulnerable nations by powerful global actors.
Nope. There you go. Sorry.
Since entering the diamond trade in Congo in 1997, Israeli companies have carved out a dominant position, contributing substantially to Israel's economy.
I was 4 years old, I think.
Yeah.
93, 97.
97.
Something like that. People can do the math at home. Yeah.
Okay. In addressing the exploitation of the Democratic Republic of Congo, it is essential to confront the pervasive influence of neocolonialism and the global complicity that sustains it. The voices of African activists, scholars, and local communities in the DRC are not just articulating the trauma of exploitation, they are starting an alarm for a global reckoning, which I think we've talked about in West Africa.
It's happening. Yeah.
We're beginning to see that. And a little bit, well, we've also kind of talked about Congo prior, but
yeah.
The complexities of the DRC's plight cannot be fully understood with acknowledging colonial and neo-colonial practices. These systemic forces have shaped the country's current governance and economic structures and limited local actors' agency, trapping them in a cycle of survival within an oppressive framework. To fully address the exploitation in the DRC, the global community must recognize and dismantle the mechanisms of neocolonialism. This recognition entails moving beyond passive acknowledgement to active resistance, embodying the spirit of Mario Savio's call to action. It requires a collective commitment to make these exploitative systems so odious that it cannot continue unchallenged. The global community must not only refuse to participate in these systems, but must also actively work to disrupt and dismantle them. For the Congolese people, achieving justice and reclaiming control over their resources is extradientally linked to the global movement against neocolonialism. The international exploitation of the DRC's natural wealth, particularly its diamonds, must be recognized as a form of neocolonialism and treated as such by the world community. This shift demands stringent international laws and norms that criminalize and penalize the exploitation of resource-rich nations. It requires a fundamental change in how the world values natural resources, prioritizing human dignity and community well-being over material wealth. The global community's role is to support the DRC in its fight against exploitation and actively participate in dismantling the systems that perpetuate this exploitation.
Okay. Cool. What do we got here? Any diamonds?
So seeing the connection between, well, basically, this is a bribe chart, basically.
Okay, so we start with Benny Steinman. He's the owner of BSGR, right? So we go over him now until he'll be back to Neron, Tory's CEO, right?
No.
As part of a settlement, Neron gets bribery, tainted mining block for 50 million. Okay.
Yeah.
And BSGR and Guinea sued each other. Yeah.
SIS Group Resources.
Okay.
BSRG had mining rights. Yeah. So basically, money laundering. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a washing machine of money. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So
cool.
So, the activities of Israeli businessmen in Africa, particularly in cases like Gerler and Steinmetz, prompt a critical examination of the intersection between Zionism, Israeli foreign policy, and African geopolitics. These instances occurring within a broader context of resource exploitation reflect the complex nature of Zionism as it intersects with global economic and political agendas. Israel's foreign policy, often seen as an extension of its national ideology, raises questions about the role and influence of Zionism in shaping these international engagements. For resource-rich but economically struggling African nations, the actions of individuals like Gertler and Steinmetz have significant implications. They exemplify a pattern where external economic interests, in this case tied to Israeli nationals, exploit vulnerabilities for profit, often at the expense of local development and governance. This dynamic challenges the conventional narrative of development and philanthropy often associated with foreign investments. The ethical responsibilities of Israeli companies and, by extension, the Israeli state come into sharp focus. It is imperative to assess whether these actions align with the ethical standards and values professed by Zionism and Israeli policy. This scrutiny is about compliance with legal norms and the moral and ethical implications of such engagement. The narrative of development and aid, often used to justify foreign investment in Africa, must be critically evaluated to ensure it does not mask exploitative practices. Ultimately, this discourse demands reevaluating Israeli foreign policy and business practices in Africa, ensuring they contribute positively and equitably to the nations they engage with. To fully grasp the impact of foreign exploitation African resources, it is essential to turn to the voices of those directly affected, African activists, political analysts, and the local population. Their insights paint a vivid picture of the ground realities and offer a crucial counter-narrative to the often dominant international perspectives. African activists consistently highlight the disparity between the wealth generated from national resources and the persistent poverty experienced by local communities. They argue that deals made by foreign businesses like those of Gurley and Steinmetz often bypass the needs and rights of the populace, exacerbating economic and social disparities. Political analysts from the continent point to the systemic issues of governance and corruption that enable such exploitation, emphasizing the need for more vital institutions and transparency in dealing with international entities.
Mm-hmm.
The local population, for those who live on the lands rich in resources, offer the most poignant perspective. They speak of disrupted livelihoods, environmental degradation, and a sense of betrayal by both their governments and foreign actors. Their narratives underscore a feeling of being spectators in the plunder of their own resources, sidelined in the decisions that directly impact their lives and futures. These diverse African voices collectively call for a rethinking of how natural resources are managed and the demand for equitable partnerships prioritizing sustainable development and respect for local communities. This perspective is crucial in reshaping the discourse around resource exploitation in Africa and in formulating policies that genuinely benefit the people of this richly endowed continent. So actually, I have a couple more slides, I believe, on this, but
okay.
I mean, I mean, I don't think I really need to say anything because I feel like I talk about this constantly as far as what's been happening in Africa, and then just we talk about it we're doing, but we don't often associate with what Israel is doing. And so even with Israel, they're complicit in a lot of this too for their wealth of their own. And honestly, I will say this here, and I've said it multiple times, China as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know people have
Guinea.
Right.
So
we make the argument that China might be more.
They're nicer about it.
They're nicer about it, but it's not necessarily to the point where workers are.
It's like compared to what we do and what the West do, they're like 95% better than us. But versus our all shit.
Right, but I've mentioned this before. When I have gone to Uganda, most recently, the last time I went was back in 2019. Part of the Belt and Road Initiative. They were building basically a new highway from the airport to Kampala, the capital. Beautiful, built by the Chinese. But the issues that people were telling me on the ground were, the majority of the supervisors basically were Chinese. They weren't African.
Yeah.
And it was the Chinese that were basically, I don't want to say like slave drivers, but, but they weren't empowering the African like the Ugandans who were working on the project to actually do the work. It was basically run by the Chinese. So those were issues that people on the ground were telling me that they had an issue with. Yeah. So yes, they're nicer in terms of, I don't even want to say equitable, but like they're willing to have these kind of conversations in terms of, foreign infrastructure, like somewhat a little more, I guess you could say equitable in some ways.
Yeah.
But but as I say, it's very mixed depending on the country. Like for some African countries, if they have more resources, it can be a huge benefit to them versus if they don't, that they may have to take out loans that they're going to be paying off, for however long. And then obviously who reaps the majority of the benefits? China. but at least with Israel and the West is a lot more exploitative in terms of what we see here, and what was mentioned in the article is that the people who are working are poor, and they're not getting, they're not reaping the benefits of what they're producing.
Well, you got a little bit more, I think, right?
Yeah, I have. I think I have a couple more. Yeah, 2 more, and then we do have a quick clip. The narratives of Dan Girdlier in the Congo and Benny Steinmetz in Guinea encapsulate in a broader theme of exploitation and corruption in African resource-rich nations, intricately linked with Israeli business activities. The entry of Israel diamond businesses into the DRC in 1997, closely followed by the country's descent into turmoil by 1998, highlights a disturbing correlation between foreign economic interests and regional instability. These cases underscore the urgent need for greater transparency, accountability, and ethical practices in international business, particularly in the mining sector. As we confront these realities, it becomes imperative to champion a paradigm shift towards justice and equity in resource management. The exploitation of African resources, often at the cost of local communities and national development, demands a collective call to action. The path forward requires a steadfast commitment to ensuring that natural wealth translates into tangible benefits for those who live on these lands, and not just profits for distant stakeholders. It's time for the global community to reevaluate and reflect how we engage with the world's resources, prioritizing fairness, responsibility, and the dignity of all communities.
Yeah.
And
I think that's it.
Sasabi, Sasabi brought a clip very quick, is about under 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Where she says, so this is an example, not diamonds, but she mentions child slaves working in cobalt mines in the Congo, while the West reaps the benefits of their labor. So, you see how packed it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the sand mines of Nigeria, or
right.
Yeah, I mean, like, quite a few folk.
Right.
Tearing holes in the earth. Welcome to mining. But this is standard across Africa too. Like, you look at the sand mines; they're just as packed with children. So, but yep. So, standard stuff. I feel like, unfortunately.
Yeah. Just some part. I feel like we talk about this ad nauseum. I feel like I'm constantly repeating these talking points almost every week, but yeah, it's just more example of how just are, and we have to think in terms of even in a social dem environment, where at least if you look at like Sweden or Denmark, any of these countries, you might have a lot more progressive policies, but you have to think about, okay, how are they able to have these policies? More often than not, is at the expense of people in the global south. So, so we have to think about that too, in terms of the ideology that even, certain progressives have, and how that also ties back to the exploitation and destruction of what's happening in Africa in particular, in terms of rummaging their natural resources and then not giving the local communities anything essentially to live.
Right. Well, this is what happens when you do your own research and read the articles, Well,
looks like we got ourselves a reader.
Yep. We got 2 readers, in fact. But yeah, let us know what you think. Leave a comment, like and subscribe even. You know where those buttons are. They're right down there. Help that subscribe number go up. We're trying to get to 2K. Let us know in the comments what number you got.